Campaign group DignitySA is to take government to the High Court in a bid to change the laws around assisted dying. To find out more, I'm joined by Helena Dolny from the group. Helena, thank you very much for coming into studio this morning. I mean, this is not the first time this issue has come to the fore. We know that there was a law commission dealing with it in 1999, and it made certain recommendations. Take us back. What were those recommendations?
So it was a 5-year study, and it was commissioned by our late President Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, and they worked for almost 5 years under Justice Mohammed, and it was around end-of-life conditions and the right for living wills to be respected legally, that it's not a document making a request which your doctor chooses or not to respect, but that they should have legal standing, and the right to have assisted dying in certain circumstances.
What were those circumstances? Talk us through.
So the ones that are described at the end are the more restricted circumstances around terminally ill patients. DignitySA would go a step further and include intractable suffering. There are certain things like motor neuron disease or locked-in syndrome or the illness that Craig Schoenegevel had, where you say this person has intolerable, unbearable suffering and they should have a right to die with dignity. And that, you know, kind of the Law Commission precedes our Constitution. So we now have laws which are out of step with Chapter 2 of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Section 12 of the, which says that we have a right to dignity, that we have a right not to be degraded, that we have a right to have control over our own bodies.
I wanted to go back and just ask you about one of the definitions here of who would qualify for
Yes.
assisted dying. And you mentioned people who were suffering from degenerative diseases as well. Would those decisions, or could they necessarily, according to what you propose, be made by the families of those individuals, or would those individuals themselves have had to specify that should they find themselves in these conditions, this is how they would like to die?
So our slogan is your life, your choice. And we have members who say, I need this law because my family will extend caring and medical intervention in my life when I no longer want it. And they will think that they are loving me, whereas I want a right to decide that I've had enough. The case of Mario Ambrosini is obvious. Terminally ill, 17 months, lung cancer, artificial feeding, a lung cancer, not being able to breathe. That's very obvious. There are other situations where, for example, Craig Schoenegevel, the doctors were saying, you had 20 operations, you could have another, you could have another. And he said, I've had enough. So I think it's very hard for families, and ultimately you yourself, myself, we should be the ones that decide what's right for us.
Do you ever think it could be open to abuse of euthanasia, where people who possibly stand a good chance of long-term recovery, or who might be able to be involved in clinical trials for new drugs and so on, may prematurely and perhaps incorrectly choose to end their lives when there is some hope of a better quality of life in the future?
So the criteria are intractable, unbearable suffering. Now that's quite subjective. Your level of pain tolerance may be different from my level of pain tolerance, and people will make the best decision that they make at the time. We all do that all the time in our lives. We make a decision to get married. That's the best decision we make at the time. Sometimes it doesn't work out. It's a bit more final when you make a decision to end your life.
I mean, the option of divorce, if you're using that example, might be one. But say, for example, you're talking about psychological illness, severe psychological illness, perhaps severe psychological depression that may be treatable over the long term. Surely we start entering a very grey area there.
I think that is a grey area, and if you look at the laws that have been passed in Oregon and in Washington State, there's always a panel that's consulted. and there's 2 doctors who are giving their opinions. I think that psychological depression, we don't know enough about it. And for me personally, I see some people who are clinically depressed and it's unbearable, intractable suffering. But it is one of the grey areas that will be more difficult for people to contemplate.
And it will be difficult to legislate, will it not? For something that falls into such a blurred area.
It'll be very interesting to see what a legislation proposes, a bill proposes. There was a lot of work done by the Law Commission. I think it's 15 years ago. It's been gathering dust on the shelves for 15 years. And I think there's 15 more years of world history and medical research. And it would be absolutely wonderful if politicians would reactivate that bill and perhaps redraft it. And then our High Court action would fall away. It's not our first choice. It's a way of trying to activate a lot of work that's already been done.
It is unlikely, though, that it will happen in such a short period of time. I mean, how will you argue when you take this case to court, given the grey areas we've spoken about? How will you argue for this law to be implemented in such a short time?
So there are 3 laws that we want. One law is on the living wills. At the moment, it is a document that does not have legal standing as far as one's doctor is concerned. We would like that to be a document that it's obligatory to comply with. If your doctor has an issue with it, they must recommend you to somebody else, like termination of pregnancy. The second law is enduring power of attorney. We don't have the enduring power. I could say, oh yes, Joanne is the person that I have confidence in, but if something happens to me in terms of my mental capacities, the power of attorney falls away, and we want it to be enduring. Otherwise, you have legal situations which are difficult, you become a ward of court. And the third is on assisted dying, and then you could have many categories. You can see it in the different countries. For some countries, and Oregon, it's terminally ill with a prognosis of 6 months. In other countries, then unbearable suffering qualifies, and that could be motor neuron disease, locked-in syndrome, and in some countries, depression would fall within that category. And we might as well go for gold, and we may not get gold. But in terms of starting and contributing towards a debate, the more we debate, the better. And I saw this morning that in the UK, they're putting 1.6 million and sort of saying mental illness needs more research. It's something that we don't understand well enough.
It's a very interesting discussion indeed. Thanks very much, Helena Dolny, for coming in to talk to us. She is, of course, from Dignity South Africa.